Peter, thanks for joining Spectator TV.
Pleasure.
You spent some time in prison lately. Tell us about that.
Well, it's very unpleasant, but I volunteered for it, so I can't complain. If you can't take a joke, you shouldn't have joined. Channel 4 came to me and said, would I take part in a reality experiment in as near as could possibly be recreated to a real prison. They'd hired a number of former actual prisoners and a number of actual retired prison officers, and they'd also hired a recently decommissioned prison in Shrewsbury. And they proposed to put us all together, those people and about 7 minor celebrities, such as I am, in these circumstances, and film us all the time, see what happened, see how we took it. And I've been quite trenchant about prisons in my life, and I still hold quite strong opinions about them, and I thought it would be cowardly of me to say no, so I said yes. A lot of people put up with it for a whole week. I would have put up with it for a week if I'd been asked, but they kept me out until the final 4 days. And that, I have to tell you, was quite enough. I was very pleased when it was over. There was there were moments of laughter and what you might call bonding and quite emotional moments, but it was never at any stage a pleasure and never something that you wanted to last any longer than it did.
To go back to the beginning, when Channel 4 approached you about this, you must have had some reservations. What made your principles, so to speak, trump the reservations you might have had?
Well, I didn't really. In a long life, I've learned that opportunities often come to you in unalluring ways. And
this is very unalluring.
You might as well take them. That quite often things which appear unalluring to begin with, journeys that you might or might not undertake, places you might or might not go to, it's almost always worth saying yes. So probably I was the least likely person to have misgivings about it.
You said you spent 4 days in Shrewsbury prison. How real did this simulation feel?
Often very real. The building is as it would be, and they'd very carefully made it as like the real thing as possible. The officers behaved as far as possible as they would have done, and the prisoners, I think, in many ways did rather nobly, because they saw it as a way of making some restitution for what they'd done. These are all former prisoners who stopped being criminals, really entered into the spirit of it. They gave us as much as possible what we would have got if it had been real. Now, we knew that it was most unlikely that any serious violence would take place. We knew that other characteristics of real prison weren't there. We also knew that ultimately we could get out. You could press the chicken switch and someone would come and take you away. But it was very much discouraged, and you were told it would be very unwelcome. And I don't think anybody actually did that. But you knew ultimately. But in fact, you quite quickly forgot once you were in there that it was possible to get out. You became very convinced you were there by compulsion. You'd lost all power over your life. And the architecture, the power of architecture was one of the most underestimated arts. I always go on about it, but I have to say, being in a Victorian prison built with the purpose of impressing on the convicted prisoner that he has done wrong is quite an experience. The very bricks are talking to you, the shape of the archway of the door, the tunnel shape of the cell, the high window with a view of nothing except a chimney and the famous little tent of blue that prisoners call the sky. All that does have an impact on you, and the clanging of heavy iron and the stamp of booted feet on cast iron landings. It comes home to you and makes you behave and feel differently, quite lonely and quite downcast.
You mentioned in your piece that the experience felt almost religious. Was part of that the setting?
I think yes. I think any serious experience of unpleasantness, of solitude, of self-doubt, and of fear, because there was some fear involved in it, I think it turns the mind towards God. If there's any room in your mind for God at all, these things will turn your mind towards Him.
I wanted to ask if you were afraid. Were you consistently afraid? Were there specific moments where you
There were moments when I was afraid. Yeah. And these were people who had obviously been capable in their past lives of great violence. I didn't know who they were. We got a very sketchy introduction to who they were. They looked, in many cases, quite frightening. There were occasions when my very voice annoys people. And it just does. I have to be, as I've written in the article, I have to be careful on public transport late at night, speaking as I do. my manner, the things that I say, they annoy people. And I wasn't totally sure. I don't want to cast any slur on anybody, because in fact I got a lot of generosity from the former prisoners. But at the beginning of it, I really wasn't sure where I stood with him, and I thought it was perfectly possible I might have an accident on the stairs.
Well, I'm sure our Spec TV watchers will be delighted to be listening to you, Peter. I want to talk about one session where you spoke with an ex-convict about drugs and addiction. Tell our viewers what happened in that very confrontational session.
Well, I didn't. I have two very unpopular opinions. One, that addiction...
Just two?
Addiction doesn't exist. No, I have lots, but on this subject, I have two particularly unpopular ones. One is addiction doesn't exist, which doesn't. It's an attempt to abolish free will. The whole use of the term in the way that it is used in the English language, which is, apart from anything else, extremely variable. And the other is that marijuana is not a soft and safe drug that anybody can take and without harm, but it is in fact probably the most dangerous of all the drugs. I decided I didn't want to, because I know it can get very boring, I didn't want to have a row about addiction in prison, as I was sure that the idea that there is no real free will, that we're not really responsible for our actions, would be pretty popular among ex-prisoners, and not one I'd have an easy time dissuading them of. But on the other hand, when people started talking about marijuana as a soft drug, I thought, here I am, this may get onto television, I can't sit here, it would be cowardly to sit here and keep my mouth shut. So I said that what I think, that it's an incredibly dangerous drug. And a number of people became extremely angry. It was immensely strong, and it destroys the lives of children.
I can focus on things. I'm totally focused on things on weed. What you're talking is...
How did it end?
Well, it ended with them storming out in that scene, but afterwards, for more than a few hours, I was getting pretty nasty looks from some of the people involved.
Peter, I don't know if you'll remember this. This was years ago. I was still in think tank world. You and I exchanged some emails about the gender pay gap.
Yes, I do remember.
And I remember after almost every email, you'd sign off your name and P.S. You're still wrong about drugs. Just so I remember, just so I was clear that we shouldn't agree on it.
The whole attitude of intelligent, educated people towards drugs in our society is an extraordinary thing, and it's done, as far as I'm concerned, an enormous amount of harm. So I keep at it. Where I see any signs of hope, I think you should be flattered that I thought you were worth the effort.
Well, you made very clear on only on particular topics. We'll have that debate another time.
Sure.
My last question to you, Peter, is whether or not your views on British prisons have changed since going in.
No, because they're not what people think they are. I've never been a lock people up for the rest of their lives, bread and water, flogging person. I don't think there's any point in that. I think long prison sentences are futile. They destroy the souls of those who are subjected to them. I've seen inside quite a lot of prisons, and having done that, you can't, I think, really be human and believe that sending people to prison for very long periods of time is normally justified. Obviously, there are exceptional cases where people have simply to be kept off the streets. But I personally would rather be dead than spend 25 years in a prison. And that's just an expression of absolute opinion from what I've seen of them. So I'm not in favor of that. I think prisons should be austere. I think they should involve a lot of hard work, and I think that they should be full of the power of the state. The problem with prisons is that they're tough in the wrong way. They're not austere, they're squalid. They're chaotic, despite the efforts of the hugely outnumbered prison officers whose role in this is so often completely underestimated, and who keep things from becoming totally uncivilized in a way which ought to be more valued. But they are chaotic. They are increasingly under the control of the inmates. They're full of drugs, and they're full of suicide, and they're full of completely uncontrolled violence, and therefore there is no, in the place where the law sends people, there is no rule of law. In fact, there is no rule of authority. And so they're completely unfit for the job they're supposed to do. So I would have them, as I say, back under the control of the authorities, places of punishment, due punishment of responsible persons, as we used to call it, by the state, not people being punished by other criminals for not fitting in with them, which is what you get. And that you would have to have, and this of course reflects society outside, you would have to have a total exclusion of drugs. But it's very hard to exclude drugs from prison when society makes so little effort to exclude them from itself. Free people can take drugs. It's not surprising that prisoners are taking them.
This is actually my last question to you, Peter. Did it give you more or less faith in the rehabilitation system after prison, given that you were in there with ex-convicts? These are people who had now left prison. They were back in there. Presumably they were asked by Channel 4 to take on the role of acting like prisoners so that they could have the simulation. But in terms of the conversations you were having, the interactions, how did it change your views about rehabilitation?
Well, rehabilitation, like addiction, doesn't exist. There is no such thing, nor any record of it ever having happened.
You don't think people can rehabilitate?
People grow up and mature and tire of crime, or they cease to be able to run fast enough to get away after they've committed it. But I'm not in any case in favour of trying to change people's characters. The idea of rehabilitation, of working on someone to make him a different person, seems to me to be totalitarian. In a free society, you punish people for wrong acts. And make it plain to them that if they do them again, they'll be punished again. And you also make it plain to other people that if they do these wrong acts, they too will be punished. That's how free society treats the people in it who inevitably transgress. The whole idea of rehabilitation is repulsive to me, and I wouldn't be in favour of it if I believed it happened. But no, I don't. It doesn't change my view on that at all.
Can an individual choose to rehabilitate themselves?
Well, I say, what do you mean by the word? Individuals can choose to stop doing bad things, and often do. But they do that for many reasons. They learn, for instance, that it's disastrous for their family life. They learn that it estranges them from their children. They learn that prison, however strong and tough you are, is never going to be a nice place, and they want to return to it. They change their lives while remaining the same people. And that suits me. I want people to remain free men and women. I don't want.
But that's the catch. It sounds like
broken.
It sounds like you're saying they can change their behavior, but not change their character. I guess
Yes.
I'm just questioning whether or not perhaps a person could choose to change their character.
You'd have to ask somebody else. It's not something I know anything about.
Fair enough.
I seem to have been stuck with the same character all my life.
Peter, thanks for joining me.